Hello to all of you. Let's discuss chapter number 4. So chapter number 4 is basically about carbon. So in this chapter we are going to focus all about carbon, um, organic chemistry, why carbon is so important, what are the properties of carbon, and most important thing is the life on the planet Earth is carbon based. Okay, so basically living organisms consist mostly of carbon based compounds. So basically what life is, so as we have discussed in previous chapters, that the basic subunit of life is a cell. So cell is an independent entity which can perform inside one cell. Everything is there and the whole life can exist in one single cell. And basically these cells, they connect with each other and they form tissues. Tissues form organs form organ systems, and different organ systems forms one organism. So basically, the basic subunit of life is cell, and this cell, as if we talk about human beings, we are made of trillions of cells. So our cells, they are basically made of some biomolecules, and those biomolecules are like proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and the nucleic acids. And these biomolecules which make our cells, these are the same biomolecules which we eat in our food. So these biomolecules, when they get into our system, they basically get broken down, okay, by a process called catabolism. And in this process, energy is released, and these biomolecules, which are like a big molecule, they're also called macromolecules, or they are polymers, they get broken down into the subunits or the monomers, and with the help of the anabolic reaction. So we will be talking about all these things in upcoming chapters, and because of the and then with the anabolic reactions, these subunits or the monomers, they combine back, they link back, and they form polymers or the macromolecules, and they become the part of the new cells. So basically our cells, they are made of biomolecules, and these biomolecules have carbon in them as a predominant element. Okay, so now the next question is, why carbon? Okay, so this is just showing you life, and life on our planet Earth is basically carbon based. So this is the structure of carbon. So we have talked about some chemistry in chapter number 2. There we talked about the different elements, we talked about the periodic table, there we talked about carbon. So carbon is an element which has atomic number of 6. So you know that if the atomic number is 6, which means that it has 6 electrons, and these 6 electrons, they are distributed. In the first energy shell goes the 2 electrons, and in the second energy shell goes the 4 electrons. So basically the valency of carbon is 4. So carbon needs, so this is basically the structure of carbon. So the valence shell of carbon has 4 electrons. So carbon needs 4 more electrons to become stable. So the valency of carbon is 4. The bonding capacity of carbon is 4. So carbon can form bonds with 4 atoms, and those atoms can be the same atoms or they can be the different atoms. So in this chapter we are going to talk about, we're going to focus on carbon and the properties of carbon, and why why on our planet Earth life is carbon based. So here is one question I would like all of you to think about. If you look in the periodic table, in the same family where the carbon is, in the same family of the carbon, there is another element called silicon, and silicon also has 4 electrons in its outermost shell or in the valence shell. So the properties of silicon and carbon, they are quite same. But why the life is not silicon based? Why life is carbon based? So this is a question I would like all of you to think. And also I have posted one video in this week's folder, which is about a discovery from a lab in California. It's about they have found some bacteria, and they have from Iceland, and they have mutated that bacteria. They have done mutations in that bacteria, and because of which that bacteria is now forming one enzyme with the help of which carbon silicon bonds can be formed. So I want all of you to watch that video. It's a very important video, and it is very related to the concept that why the life is carbon based. Why life? It's not. It's basically related to this topic. Why life is carbon based? Why life is not silicon based? And basically, the chemists, they have been using some inorganic catalyst, and they have been successful in making silicon and carbon bonds, and they're called organosilicates, and they are using they're used in agrochemicals and LED screens and various things. But now this lab from Caltech, they have done a mutation in a bacteria, and because of that mutation in the bacteria, they now have one enzyme which can make the carbon and silicon bond. So this is a new discovery, because earlier the carbon and silicon bonds were formed only by the inorganic catalyst, but now enzymes, which are like the organic catalysts, they are also able to do that. So please watch that video. It's very, very important video for all of you. Okay, now coming back to lesson, let's talk about some of the terms. Organic chemistry, it's a study of compounds that contain carbon regardless of its origin. So you know what organic chemistry is. Organic compounds, they can be simple compounds, simple molecules, or they can be very big molecules also. We're going to talk about all these things. So now a very, very important question is why carbon? So what's so remarkable about carbon that the nature has chosen carbon? So there are two important things which you need to know about carbon is, first of all, as I already told you, the atomic number of carbon is 6, which means number of protons are 6. If protons are 6, how many electrons? They are also 6. And these 6 electrons, they are distributed as 2 and 4. So the valence energy shell of carbon has 4 electrons. So which means that carbon needs 4 more electrons. So the bonding capacity of carbon is 4. So which means that carbon can form 4 bonds, and those bonds can be with the same atoms or they can be with the different atoms. So number one, why carbon has been chosen? Because its bonding capacity is 4, which is a lot. And number two, very important thing to know about carbon is, carbon forms covalent bonds, and covalent bonds are the strongest bonds. So this is another very important property of carbon. So because carbon is a predominant element, in the biomolecules, and these biomolecules, they make our cells, carbon forms covalent bonds. Covalent bonds are the strongest bonds. So these biomolecules, which basically have carbon as a predominant element, so these biomolecules, they have carbon in them, and they form covalent bonds, and they're the strongest bond. And these biomolecules, they form our cells, and cells form the life. So which means that the bonds which are involved in life forms, the bonds which are there in the life forms, they are covalent bond, and they are the strongest bonds. And for the life forms, these bonds, they should be very strong, because these biomolecules are going to make the life. So this is very, very, I hope it's clear. It's very, very important property of carbon, that carbon shares electrons. Okay, so if you go back to chapter number 2, you know what are ionic bonds, what are covalent bonds. So covalent bonds are formed because of the sharing of electrons. So carbon shares electrons, so it forms covalent bonds. So carbon is a predominant element in the biomolecules, and biomolecules, they form cells. Cells represent life. So these are two important properties of carbon. Number one, its bonding capacity is 4, which means it can form 4 bonds. Number two, it forms covalent bonds, and they are the strongest bonds. So this is all what I just said is written here. I would quickly go over it. So this is what it is. With the 4 valence electrons, carbon can form 4 covalent bonds with a variety of atoms. This makes large complex molecules possible. And another important thing to know about carbon is, like as I said, carbon can also form bonds with carbon itself. So carbon can form bond with hydrogen, it can form bonds with carbon, it can form bond with oxygen. So, and carbon can form single bonds, carbon can form double bonds, carbon can also form triple bonds. So when carbon forms single covalent bond, which means they are sharing one pair of electron. When two carbons they share two pair of electrons. When two carbons they share two pair of electrons, they form double bond with each other. And when two carbon atoms they share three pair of electrons, when the two carbon atoms they share three pair of electrons with each other, they form the triple bond. And you can see that this is like carbon bonded with four hydrogens. Carbon bonded with four hydrogens with all the single bonds. You can see how the shape is. It's shape of a tetrahedron. And this is ethane, two carbons linked with each other, and each carbon is linked with three hydrogens. And this is ethene. In ethene, two carbons are linked to each other by double bond, and then each carbon is linked with two hydrogens. So in molecules with multiple carbons, each carbon bonded to four other atoms has a tetrahedral shape. Sorry. So you can see here, this is the carbon which is linked with four hydrogens, and the structure of this compound is like a tetrahedron. And when two carbons are joined by a double bond, the atoms joined to carbons are in the same plane as the carbons. So you can see all these atoms, they are in the same plane as these are two carbons here. So this is ethene, the two carbons they link to each other by double bond. So these two carbons they link to each other. This carbon linked by double bond, and the other atoms, the hydrogens, they are in the same plane. So this is just showing you some of the partners of carbon. Carbon can form bonds with hydrogen, it can form bond with oxygen or with nitrogen. Hydrogen's valency is 1, which means its bonding capacity is 1. Oxygen's valency is 2, which means its bonding capacity is 2. Nitrogen's valency is 3. So this is just showing you how this is the structure of carbon dioxide. So this is the carbon. This carbon is linked with two oxygens. So this is carbon, and this carbon is linked with two oxygens. So carbon, as you know, has 4 electrons in its outermost shell. So this carbon shares 2 electrons with this oxygen, and this carbon shares 2 electrons with this oxygen. So which results in the formation of a double bond between this carbon and oxygen, and it also results in the formation of double bond between this carbon and oxygen, and that results in the formation of carbon dioxide. This is showing you urea. So these are all carbon compounds. In urea, carbon is forming double bonds with oxygen, and carbon is forming 2 bonds with oxygen, and also carbon is forming 1 bond with nitrogen, and carbon is forming another bond with this nitrogen. So carbon needs 4 electrons, so they are all fulfilled like this. And this nitrogen valency is 3. So this nitrogen is forming 1 bond with carbon, and it's forming 2 bonds with 2 hydrogens. Same thing here. So this is urea. So carbon compounds are very versatile. Carbon compounds can be like a straight chain, they can be having some double bonds in between them, or they can be some branches, or even carbon compounds can form some ring structures. So you can see this is ethane, there are 2 carbons, and each carbon is linked with 3 hydrogens. This is propane, there are 3 carbons, and they are linked with, this carbon is linked with 3 hydrogens, this carbon is also linked with 3 hydrogens, this carbon is linked with 2 hydrogens. This is 1-butene, this is 2-butene. There are double bonds between carbons here. And branching, if you have studied in chemistry, that these compounds, they can also form branches. So this is butane. Butane has like 4 carbons, and this is 2-methyl propane. So there are three carbons in the single chain, and this is the 4th carbon is now in the ring. So this is 2-methyl propane, and these are some carbon compound which has some rings in them. Hydrocarbons are those compounds which have carbon and hydrogen in them. So many organic molecules. Organic molecules means those molecules which have carbon in them, such as fats have hydrocarbon component. So which means fats, they have hydrocarbon component, means they have carbons and hydrogens in them, and hydrocarbons give release large amount of energy. This is a fat molecule. So we will talk about structure of fats and all that in chapter number 5. Okay, now let's talk about what are isomers. So isomers are those compounds. Isomers are those compounds which have the same molecular formula, but they have different structure, and because they have different structure, they have different properties. So isomers are compounds with same molecular formula. So molecular formula means they have same number of carbons in them, they have same number of hydrogens in them, they have same number of oxygen in them. So that is what means the molecular formula. So the isomers are those compounds which have same molecular formula, but because they have a different structure, they have different properties. Now under the isomers, there are different kinds of isomers: structure isomers, cis and trans isomers, and enantiomers. Structure isomers have basically different covalent arrangement of the atoms. Cis and trans isomers, basically they have double bonds in them, and they have like if some functional group is on the on the same side, it's called cis isomer, and if the functional groups are on opposite sides, they're called trans isomers. And enantiomers are the mirror images of each other. So this is like structure isomers. This is like you can see, this is pentane. So pentane has 5 carbons in them, and then this is 2-methyl butane. So this is a branch structure in which 4 carbons are in the straight chain and the 5th carbon is in the branch. So pentane and 2-methyl butane, they are structure isomers because they have same molecular formula, which means they have how many carbons? They have 5 carbons and they have 12 hydrogens. Same thing here. 2-methyl butane also has 5 carbons and 12 hydrogens, but they have a branch. So their structure is different, and because the structure is so basically we can say the covalent arrangement of the atoms is different in these two compounds, but they have the same molecular formula. So these are called the structure isomers. These are cis and trans isomers. So these are the compounds which have double bonds in them, and if some functional group is on the same side, like you can see, this is some functional group, this is some group of atoms. If both these are on the same side, then this is a cis isomer. But if they are on the opposite sides of the double bond, then they're called the trans isomers. So the 2 carbons which are linked to each other by double bonds, they're considered to be on the same plane, and this side is considered above the plane and this side is considered below the plane. So if the functional groups are on the same side of the plane, or like in this case, both functional groups are on the upper plane, then this isomer is cis isomer. But if one functional group is on this side, another is on this side, then they are the trans isomers. Now enantiomers, they are the mirror images of each other. Okay, they are like left and the right hand. So enantiomers are important in pharmaceutical industry. There are many drugs like ibuprofen or albuterol. They have enantiomers, and one of the enantiomers is active. So ibuprofen, which is like a painkiller, and albuterol is a drug which is given to the asthma people so that their bronchial airways are relaxed. So all these drugs, they have 2 enantiomers. but one of the enantiomer is effective and another is ineffective. Okay, another topic we need to discuss in this chapter is about the functional groups. And we are going to discuss some of the very, very important functional groups which will be required in the upcoming chapter, chapter number 5 on the biomolecules. So functional groups are those groups which are basically a group of atoms. Functional group is a group of atoms which is, so this group of atoms, when it is attached to some compound or some compound, it changes its properties. That is what a functional group is. Like you have seen methane, CH4. Okay, let me go back and show you here. So you can see this is methane, this is carbon, and there are 4 hydrogens. Okay. This is carbon and these are 4 hydrogens. So if we remove one hydrogen from here, and attach some functional group like OH group, okay, I'm going to discuss what OH group is. If we attach a OH group here, then this compound is no more going to be methane. It is going to become, so if we remove H from here and add OH group here, it does not stay as methane, it becomes methanol. It becomes an alcohol. That is what is the importance of a functional group. So functional group is a group of atoms. When that group of atoms are attached to some compound, it changes its properties. Because methane by itself is a gas. If we remove hydrogen from here and attach a OH group, this becomes methanol, and methanol is a alcohol. Same thing to ethane. Ethane is also a gas. If I remove hydrogen from here and attach OH group, it becomes ethanol. It is again an alcohol. So that's what functional groups are. And now we're going to discuss some of the important functional groups, and those functional groups will be required in the next chapter when we are going to talk in detail about the biomolecules. Okay, so here is one example that what's the importance of the functional groups. So you can see here this is estradiol and this is testosterone. Estradiol is a female sex hormone and testosterone is a male sex hormone. So these hormones basically they're steroids and they have these 4 carbon rings fused to each other. But now what is the difference between estradiol or estrogen and testosterone? The difference in their structure is in terms of some of the functional groups. So you can see here in the estradiol there is a OH group here, in testosterone there is an oxygen here. And in the testosterone there is a methyl group here and there is no methyl group here in the estradiol. So basically these two hormones they basically so this hormone makes female a female. This hormone makes male a male. But both hormones, they are steroids. They have similar structure, that they have 4 carbon rings fused to each other. But what makes them different is the presence of some functional groups. Testosterone has a methyl group here, and estradiol or estrogen has a OH group here. So just the difference of these functional groups makes these two hormones so different. So that is the importance of the functional groups. So there is a list of functional groups which all of you need to know because they're very important, and I'm going to discuss about these functional groups now. So first of all, you need to know what is the hydroxyl group, then carbonyl group, carboxyl group, amino group, sulfidyl group, phosphate group, and methyl group. And this is all given in a tabular form. Well, let's go and discuss one by one. Let's talk about the hydroxyl group. Hydroxyl group is having oxygen and hydrogen. Now because oxygen has atomic number is 8, so the electrons, it has 8 electrons, and these electrons, how they distributed, 2 and 6. So oxygen needs 2 more electrons. So 1 electron it gets from this hydrogen, and other electron it needs. So that is why this OH group can form a bond with some compound. Okay, so that is what is the basis of OH group. This group is also called hydroxyl group. Okay, it's called hydroxyl group. Now this is so basically this functional group is polar in nature. Why it's polar? Because it has electronegative oxygen. So we have already discussed in chapter number 2 why oxygen is electronegative, because it has a tendency to pull the electrons towards itself, because its nucleus is positively charged, because it has 8 protons. So wherever you see this oxygen, so you can always figure out that this compound or this functional group is a polar functional group or polar compound because of the presence of oxygen, because oxygen is electronegative. So this is the polar group due to the electronegative oxygen, and this group wherever it is, it can form hydrogen bonds with water, and also wherever OH group is added, that compound becomes an alcohol. Like to ethane, if you add OH, so this is basically ethane. If you just substitute OH with H, this is ethane, and if you remove H and add OH, this becomes ethanol. Okay, so the compounds with OH group, they are alcohols. Second is called carbonyl group. Okay, so in the carbonyl group, there is one carbon which is forming 2 bonds with oxygen, and the 2 bonds are free, which means that this carbon can form 2 bonds. So if this carbonyl group is present in between the carbon chain, then this group is called a ketone group. Okay, so if there's a long carbon chain, carbon linked with hydrogens, if this group is present in between, then this group is called ketone group. But if this group is present at the end of the chain, this group is called aldehyde group. So the sugars with ketone groups are called ketoses, and the sugars with aldehyde groups are called aldoses. So this is very important group. When we will talk about carbohydrates, we will talk about these again. Next is carboxyl group. Now carboxyl group is COOH group. This is also called acidic group because it has hydrogen in it. Now hydrogen can lose its proton. Okay, so carboxyl group is called acidic group because this hydrogen can lose its proton. Okay, so this group is a donor of protons. So anything which is a donor of protons or hydrogen ions, it's called a acid. So because of that, this group is also it's an acidic group. So wherever you will see the presence of COOH group, remember that compound is acidic. So you will see this group in amino acids in next chapter. You will see this group in fatty acids. So wherever this COOH group is there, you will see the word acid. Okay, so this is acetic acid, which is there in the vinegar, and this is showing you the ionized form. So ionized form in which the COOH group has lost its proton. Okay, the next group is amino group. So amino group is basically this amino group can basically accept protons. So this is a basic group. So it's a base. So it acts as a base because this group, NH2 group, can accept protons. So this is an example of an amino acid called glycine. We will talk about these more in next chapter. So glycine, which is an amino acid, has a group called amino group, and this amino group can accept protons, and this is the ionized form of this amino group when it has accepted the proton. So this group acts as a base. Okay, then there are a few more groups like sulfhydryl group. Sulfhydryl group has sulfur and hydrogen in it. It is also called thiol group. There are some amino acids like cysteine. They have this SH group in them. Then phosphate group. Phosphate group is basically a negatively charged group, and this is present in DNA. This is very, very important thing to know that DNA has phosphate group in it, and because of the presence of the phosphate group, DNA is negatively charged. Then the methyl group. methyl group is CH3. So this methyl group is present in our DNA, and wherever this methyl group is present in our DNA, the genes get silenced. So this is another functional group. Okay, the last thing in this chapter we need to know is what is ATP. So ATP is basically the energy currency in our cells, and ATP's full form is adenosine triphosphate, and it is basically made of adenosine. We will talk about the structure of adenosine in the upcoming chapters. So basically ATP adenosine triphosphate has adenosine, and it has 3 phosphate groups attached to it. And all these phosphate groups, they are negatively charged. And to keep these negatively charged phosphate groups together, a lot of energy is required. And that energy which is required to make the bonds between these phosphates, the energy which is required to make the bonds between these phosphates, that energy is the energy which is required to make these bonds between these negatively charged phosphates, that energy is stored in these bonds, and when these bonds are broken, a lot of energy is released. So that is why ATP is considered the energy currency of the cells. So this is adenosine, and these are the 3 phosphate groups. So phosphate groups all have negative charge on them. Because they have all negative charge on them, they are all going to repel each other, because they have the same charge, right? So to keep these phosphate groups together, a lot of energy is required, because they're all negatively charged. So when these negatively charged groups, they come together, they're going to repel. So a lot of energy is required to keep these negatively charged phosphate groups together. And that energy which is required to keep these groups together, that energy is stored in the form of these bonds. And from where does this energy comes to make these bonds? It comes from the food we eat. And then inside our cells, when our cells need the energy, then this ATP, it reacts with water, and a hydrolysis reaction takes place, and because of that, the bond between these phosphates is broken, and this ATP gets converted into ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So this bond is broken, and the compound formed is ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and the inorganic phosphate is released, and a lot of energy is released. So this is the way when hydrolysis reaction takes place, the bond breaks and the energy is released. So that's all from chapter number 4. If you have any question, please let me know.